Welcome to Pass the Mic, Let's Talk, an initiative of the Africa Center for Ideas program through Jade Communications. This is a series of conversations on constitutionalism. I'm John Sibiokumu. My guest on this edition is Mr. Kelvin Mogeni, Chairman of the International Commission of Jurists Autonomous Kenya Chapter. It bears noting that at 62 years of age, the ICJ is the oldest human rights organization in the world. By reputation, its niche preoccupation is with matters pertaining to the judiciary. So perhaps we could make that the focus of our discussion. Welcome, Mr. Mogeni. Kelvin, if I may.
Thank you, John.
Kelvin, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, I'm not a jurist, but I'm a citizen, and I would note that the judiciary in Africa in general is under siege. When I read the papers, I read of judges going on strike in Nigeria, of a Chief Justice being told to take 3 months leave so that he can't oversee a rerun of the elections, of a president in Zimbabwe laying down the law and saying that a Chief Justice close to his heart should have his term extended when it's in fact overrun. And it seems to me that the judiciary, let me not be unkind, may not survive for much longer as we perceive it ought to.
Of course, if we go by the trend you're setting out and what is happening all over Africa, not necessarily those the three countries you mentioned, so long as our constitutional order is under siege by the executive or being shared by the legislature, the judiciary will be under siege. And what is happening right now is that the judiciary is being torn bit by bit by the executive or the legislature by setting up issue or rules and regulations that make it impossible for the judiciary to thrive, so that it can be able to perform its function of being, the check on the one hand on bad legislation, on the other hand bad governance on the part of the executive. And so long as the judiciary is coming out to check these two institutions, they are not comfortable with it. And of course, with it, it means that we are not able to thrive as a nation. And you cannot have a nation where democratic principles do not exist if the rule of law is not adhered to. Because where there is a rule of law, then you have good governance. So what is happening in Nigeria, what is happening in Zimbabwe or in Malawi before the current president took over, is that they feel uncomfortable when the judiciary tries to assert its authority in terms of issuing orders or decisions that go contrary to what the executive feels is the direction they want them to go. So the reason why we're having this, let me call it tug of war between the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature on the other side, is that these other arms of the government do not want to adhere to laid out rules and principles that set out good governance. And so long as that is not adhered to, of course, you will have this problem because the judiciary must come up to check and set out clearly what ought to be done. So what we have here is that a constitution lays out what the executive must do and the extent the judiciary must be, and what limitations have been set out between these three institutions, arms of government. So when one arm does not play by the rules, the consequence is that it feels uncomfortable, the other one which wants it to play by the rules.
I get your point entirely. There's a good line in Shakespeare where he sort of describes the parts of the body and says that, everything is crucial to the smooth running of the next. But central to you as chairman of the ICJ, am I given to believe that the ICJ is just a membership of organizations of lawyers who get together and write papers and disseminate information and try to show that their understanding of the law is superior to the next man, but they're not achieving that much? Is that an unfair accusation?
Yes, totally unfair, because our role is not really to look at ourselves as a membership organization alone, because our operations, the way we operate and the way we do our affairs, is that we tend to reach out in terms of both being capacity builders, both to the government, the civil society or other civil society organizations, and the general public. For example, we have training processes for CUCs. Those are court users committees. We train paralegals so that they can be better, you know, they can serve the public better at the very grassroots level. The persons who are unable to afford proper legal representation. We did prepare the standing orders for the county government in terms of the capacity building for the devolved government. When you look at the Legal Aid Act that we have right now, that is now operationalized by the National Legal Aid Program, we prepared the Legal Aid Bill that we presented to Parliament through our activism process and our partners in Parliament, in the Parliamentary Human Rights Group. And that bill was adopted as an act of Parliament later on. It is now operational. We also worked in terms of preparing the access to information. That bill was a brainchild of ICJ. So it is not that we get together and do things as a group of jurists to come up with this, you know, to some papers here and there. We actually have what we call a result-oriented institution. Right now, as you realize, if you dug deeper into our papers, we are working in terms with the Pan-African, together with the African Union, to try to decriminalize petty offences.
Yes, we'll come to that later.
Yeah.
That's in my
so
notes.
That's part of the issues. You're saying that
Right.
We are not really limited to meeting and having. So in terms of what we have been doing, for example, during the COVID period, we have been having webinars where we invited the public to synthesize them on various issues as they arise. Issues as they arise, we come together, ventilate those issues, and issue communiques to the public that this is really the areas we want the public to be. So
Kelvin,
it's really...
Yeah, I'd like to say something that I'm just giving the layman's perception. If I go to my village and I go and visit my aunties and back there, it seems to me that they represent a certain couche of Kenyan society. And if I talk to my auntie so-and-so, she's never read the Constitution. She's incapable rather, of reading it in English. She's incapable of reading it in Kiswahili. And then we have this statistic that every Kenyan walking the streets is under 25, one of the youngest populations in the world. And we're talking constitutionalism to the majority of the people who don't understand what's in it. This is the point of my referring to a certain elitism.
Yeah.
If out of 47 million people, only 5 million are responsive to your initiatives, that's not success, is it?
No, I don't think that is fair to say that we're looking at that 5% or so, because when we train paralegals, when we work with the paralegals at the very, very grassroots level, we're actually working with the people who are going to make this constitutionalism understood by the common man right at the grassroots. This is really not targeting the elite or the persons who have got university education to that level. We are talking about people who will be in the informal settlement, especially when you look at the Nairobi's informal settlement, where we go to the biggest persons who have got their human rights violated by the government on a daily basis. So we actually target these people in terms of getting the results as to how we intend to ensure that their rights are understood and they're protected. So,
Kelvin, in European societies, Western societies, to sort of give a code, when the masses are feeling unhappy about something, the measure of their discontent is proved by the fact that they take to the streets. Me Too, Black Lives Matter, everybody's saying who killed so-and-so. I don't see a replay of that in Kenyan society. When an activist goes out and sprays every sort of pig with tomato sauce and whatever, I don't see very many people joining them or sustaining it for a month. Therefore, the people themselves that you're trying to change are disaffected by the whole notion of change.
You see, let me say the way our activism has been, the street activism has been mainly controlled by the political class. That those masses you see on the streets are, ferried there by the political class. But our activism, we targeted activism.
No, but I was trying to suggest that the people themselves are not adequately psyched not to need anybody to ferry them anywhere.
Yeah, you see, to psych somebody, it requires a fundamental change in their perception of what their ills or whatever is.
Exactly. So that's what I'd like you to expound on.
And I think our change, the change process occurred up to 2010 when we achieved the new constitutional order in Kenya, for example. Before that, if you remember the Kenya to Itakayo and the four C's, yeah? Citizen Coalition for Constitutional Change that was spearheaded by ICJ. We were on the streets to ensure that the desired constitutional change had been achieved. Right now, we are in the game to protect that gain that we had, to ensure that the change is not happening contrary to what the people's perception of what the people expected to have. So it's a question of, are we at that momentum into which we can now move as a mass movement?
Right, and I'd like you to comment again, to take an African perspective,
yeah,
whether you as the chairman of our autonomous institution, the ICJ, whether you look to other countries in Africa and sort of say, I wonder whether we would do well to be at the same level as, is there a role model there? Is there an African role model? Are we Africans forever in a state of perpetual education, run some workshops, tell us what to do? Who's getting it right on the ground? Would you give anybody medals? Do those medals belong to Kenya?
I think the judiciary, both in Kenya, in South Africa, have stood their ground. Let me say that we have stood our ground. In South Africa and in Kenya, for example. Both of us have got a similarly modeled constitutional order. The ones that they got in 1994, ours in 2010. Our constitutional order more or less the same. But we are holding the executive to account, despite that they have refused. They're trying to fight back. But the constitutional order that we have in place actually protects the systems if we adhere to that. South Africa has held the president to account, be it in corruption, be it in governance. And I think that's an issue we should be saying. Kenya should be headed to that direction if we avoid this process of the constitutional clawing back, that the politicians want to ensure that they can have the constitution in a way that protects their operations without them being accountable for their actions. And I think other countries, ought to, of course, look at Tanzania, Rwanda, Benin, and other countries, Sierra Leone. When the African Court for Peoples and Human Rights, comes up, and because they deposited their instruments in that court, and they take it up that you must be accountable to your people because you can file directly in that court. They were uncomfortable with that, and they withdrew from that court. Why? Because they're not comfortable with the institutions that are not accountable to them, which are not playing their game.
So you're basically saying, Kelvin, that there is no need, regardless, let's talk in empirical terms, regardless of what we read in the press on a daily basis, the judiciary will come out tops, strong, and the key player in the sustenance of democratic government. That's what you're saying.
Right now.
I would tend to disagree.
Right. Let me put it this way. I may put it in a better way.
Right.
In the mode we are right now, it is for the judiciary to take up the challenge and ensure that they don't go back to playing the whims and the tunes of the executive. Under the constitutional order we have, they can succeed. The only problem we have right now, for example, look at the judiciary fund. The only reason you can have a weak judiciary is so long as you
drain it of any kind of funding. Yes.
Yes. So long as you can drain the resources,
yes,
then it will not function. Right now we have maybe judiciary working at 35% capacity. Mm-hmm. Reason being, They don't have the resources. We told the executive that for the judiciary to function, they must have a specific percentage of the GDP embedded in the constitution. So that if we had, for example, 2.5% of that available to the judiciary at any budget, they're home and dry. But that has become a thorn. Whenever we suggested that, we have said that to the executive.
But Kelvin, you're telling me that you do not have the upper hand. So there's the contradiction.
Yep.
You're saying we're going to make this happen, but there are people who are going to make sure we can't make it happen. And they're more powerful. So who's the more powerful player without the support of the masses, which I alluded to earlier?
I can only make a statement. Maybe let me echo what Honorable Tujus stated about a couple of weeks back. This officer is ruling against the government and is coming out to be driven by the police officer against whom he has ruled.
Right.
You see, the judiciary talks through the pen, not force. Their force is the pen, the decision they make. And those decisions will set them free.
I'm going to change tack entirely because of the tyranny of time, as we'll call it. Reforms. The criminal justice reform. I believe that the ICJ is part of a task force to sort of deal with laws and the tweaking of laws that basically criminalize the poor. Would you like to expand?
Yes. We call that decriminalization of poverty. These petty offenses that have been there since the colonial times. Of course, if you remember the colonial times, you used to have the kipande to allow you move from point A to point B. That legacy is still there today. When you find somebody in the informal settlement is being arrested because he doesn't have an ID, kipande. It's not supposed to be an offense for you not to carry.
But Kelvin, who changes stuff like that? I mean, the analysis is sound. This is happening. Assume I don't know how things are regulated. What's going to happen so that what you're discussing, it seems to me that it could be gotten rid of overnight. Please don't arrest people because they've got IDs. Please don't beat people up when they're just walking up and down. Who's responsible for making sure that this stops? Because that's the aim.
The aim was good when we came up with a POA to check the police on those lines.
Right.
But then IPOA does not have the resources, then it has to rely on the police to do their investigations. So you have this catch-22 situation.
Right.
Yeah, you have an independent commission which is supposed to rely on the persons they are investigating. In the Constitution, we set out that anybody who is arrested for an offense to which only a fine is payable or it can be jailed for a maximum of 6 months should not be held in custody. Should be given a paper and appear in court if necessary. What the intention of that was to ensure that these petty offenses, hawking, being found without an ID, because you don't require to be put in custody. But do they do that? They don't. And what has Parliament tried to do right now? Try to change every offense to have a minimum of more than 6 months to meet the constitutional requirement.
Kelvin, a story. In my travels, I went to Swaziland. I think it's changed, and I'm sorry that I haven't captured Esitwani. And they had totally rejected the colonial laws and were operating on a sort of traditional African system. And I remember being taken by a friend who was like a head villager to a court case involving, and there were the elders, one family against the other. They spoke in their language, didn't speak in English. I didn't understand a word. There was a break for lunch. They came back, and at the end of the day, the elders were meant to pass judgment on this dispute between a husband and wife. When you talk about obsolete colonial laws, African solutions for African problems, as a jurist, would you encourage us to totally revamp the way we govern ourselves to our own cultural norms?
Yes. In fact, that's also one of the issues that we came up in the 2010 Constitution, alternative justice, alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. This is to encourage now the traditional forms of dispute resolution and move away from the technical and lawyer-based or lawyer-centric ways of resolving dispute. ICJ is leading in that direction together with the Judicial Training Institute and the Judicial Committee on Alternative Justice, where we've brought together, especially the elders, the Kaya group, the people from the Northeastern, where they have worked on the alternative justice system. In Somalia it happens, in South Sudan it is happening, and we're trying to enshrine this in our new, in the systems that we have in Kenya. Which area that we have spearheaded, where also we worked so hard to ensure that it is available to the public. The judiciary has taken it up in ensuring that we have these small causes courts, where claims up to 1 million, where you don't need to go through this technical process of resolving these disputes. Now, the small causes court is one of those areas where we are bringing in these informal ways of settling disputes, that you don't have to go through the technical process of having, the lawyers' pleadings and things like that. So you can informally write to the court, deposit that demand with the registrar, who will now translate that to the claim. So you don't have to have this technical process of plaint, defense,
right.
pleas,
and
all
that process is entrained.
It is.
Would it go as far as to incorporate religion? So are you going to allow the Muslim to respond to his faith and have Qadi courts and Qadi judges doing their own, instead of being tried under a different spiritual realm, Christianity?
That is an issue that has brought dispute in Nigeria to a very high level, because in Kenya, for example, we have the Qadi courts, which deal with the personal laws. Personal laws means the inheritance, marriage, and those kind of disputes. When you take the dispute of the Qadi to the criminal justice level and other commercial interests, then it's a question now, how do you deal with that? We have Sharia-compliant banks where you don't charge interest, you want to be given in the normal way, you comply with it. The only problem is, will it apply to everybody? I'm a Christian, you're a Muslim, we are dealing together. On which level are we going to deal with that? We have other institutions. Catholics have come up with that also. They have the banking processes and how to deal with the issues, education, medical. There are very many entrenched issues that the Catholic Church has. And of course, other institutions, for example, may not be comfortable with the human rights-oriented ways of life that we have today, especially when you look at issues like LGBTQI, so many forms that we have, but which tend to acknowledge the rights of other people to express themselves, live their life in the way they do without interfering with other persons. But that is an issue that can be taken out. But if you look at how that has reacted in Nigeria, they are going to the extent of ensuring that the education system should be rejected by force. And I don't know how that can resonate if we are to do that, because we are almost divided as the same way like Nigeria. The northern part of Kenya is Islamic. We have got the other side, which is Christian. Others may not be very clear which area they will be. But will we have a unified country with the legal system that we're going to operate in that can resonate to each other?
I'm going to quick fire, because I've still got my notes, and I'd just like to get some words in. Democratic governance, how can the ICJ help? And I'm going to tie that in with the idea of the role of technology. We've had elections that have been lost or found because machines didn't work. People went through a process. The process went to the... with respect, are you an outmoded institution that knows nothing about these IT developments?
Let me first put the disclaimer. As we're speaking, ICJ is working with the Judicial Committee on Elections to ensure that, number one, technology is used such that it can ensure we have a smooth process of post-election process. Let me put that in terms of post-election, because we end up having cases going on for 2 years. It's supposed to be 6 years, but the 6 years are High Court. then six months at the High Court, 6 months at the Court of Appeal. By the time it's going to be determined, it goes all the way to the Supreme Court.
Not to mention that there's a backlog of about 3,000 cases that haven't been tried
elections
in
have
the
been
last
given
year.
a special line on that.
Yes.
But technology is supposed to aid us to do things better. But for us to have that technological advancement, we should have a clear process of procuring the technology that is going to be used in the election. Technology should not be used to have a back window. You know, people always say that every computer, sometimes, you know, you develop some software, but you leave a back window for somebody to enter in and chokora whatever is inside there.
Right.
But that is the problem we have with our system. We don't have a transparent way of ensuring that our electoral process is open and free for everybody to see what is going on.
Again, I'm going to ask you the trick question, who should be responsible? I think it's always easy, Kelvin, to say there's a problem here. In a family situation, there's a problem that mum solves, a problem that dad solves. Why aren't we naming and shaming the people who ought to be responsible? And this is going to spiral back to where we began. Is it the executive? Is it the legislature? Is it the judiciary? Who's responsible? Who's going to take the flak?
Let me start from pinpointing where the problem is first. The Constitution was very clear that the IEBC, our Electoral Commission, was supposed to be given independence in terms of the finances. Two institutions had independent finances, the Judiciary Fund and the IEBC. So that an independent electoral body is supposed to control its procuring process without relying on the executive on when they do their undertakings. Right now, 11 years since the Constitution 2010, that fund is not there. They must go back to the executive to procure, to get their funds and operate. So if you want to have an independent electoral commission to operate and run its institutions, its functions, the electoral circle, you must give it an independent fund. That has not happened. Reason is what? Both the legislature and the executive want to keep a check on the IEBC. So long as that happens, we'll never have an independent election. So that governance, good governance in terms of electoral process cannot be there if the IEBC is still under the clause of the executive and the legislature.
Right, a little sideshow which is very Kenyan. With people who aren't so-called proven men and women of integrity in these bodies, if the individuals, if you have an IEBC is all wonderful, they've got all the money that they want, but the people who are within the IEBC, within the organization, are themselves morally bankrupt, how do we elect our leaders?
You can only be morally bankrupt because of the person who wants you to be there, wants you to be that. Of course, we have a process. We must ensure that the appointment process should be above board. You know, we keep up these institutions, organizations who should vote the persons who are going to be in the appointing committee, vetting committee of the persons to be nominated for appointment. Then the same people you're putting there, you don't vet them.
Right, who shall guard the guardians?
Yeah, you see now, if you send a thief to go and guard another thief, of course you know the consequences.
Right, some more quick-fire questions. Human rights, a new rubric, we've got a wonderful constitution. Are constitutional guarantees achievable, or are they just sort of pie in the sky, nice-sounding things that people read in there?
They're achievable, but they cannot be achieved if the intention to achieve them does not exist. Let me give you a glimpse into some of those provisions that, as of today, have not been even thought of by the executive or the legislature. Economic and social rights, Article 43 of the Constitution. Everybody has got the right to sustainable health care, water, environment, all those rights that have been set out under Article 43, economic and social rights. The county government of Nairobi comes up with this very flowery and nice budget for achieving those rights. But at the end of the financial year, not a single amount that has been budgeted for that is applied towards education and health services and all that. We have more money going to the executive to ensure that the president and others can enjoy luxury style, luxury life. But the right of the persons who are supposed to get those things are not there. If we apply that particular, we'll be there. But right. What has happened? Let me get an example in the health. 85% of the health budget is at the national ministry, and 15% of the functions are in the center, the ministry. 85% of the health services are at the grassroots, at the rural county government, but they receive 15% of the budget.
Right.
So functions.
Disparity clear.
Yeah, you can only have the finances following the functions.
Right.
Not the other way around.
I'm going to rev up the engine and just ask short sound bites. This is the country. Ours is a country of cartels. This is our country of the deep state. This is our country of state capture. This is the country where we do not have. We're not free because others are sort of gerrymandering and pulling the strings. We're not totally liberated. What kind of role can an institution such as the ICJ play in dismantling the deep state?
What we've done so far is whenever we find that certain institutions are not playing their part the way they're supposed to do, we resort as a last resort to litigation. We file constitutional references, to ensure that certain of the issues that must be achieved are done. If we find there is a legislation that is coming up that is contrary to what the Constitution requires it to, we go to court to challenge that legislation. If we find, for example,
will it also take you 10 years to have resolution because things are challenged in one court, they go to the Supreme Court, they go to the Court of Appeal. Everything in the Kenyan thing is grinding on people who've made terrible mistakes. They're still walking up, and governors who've made things. They're still walking around in expensive clubs in Nairobi having a whale of a time.
You must continue trying. You achieve it along the way. And if for example, if we find that the litigation and those processes don't work, we also get ourselves into ways of changing from within the institutions that we want to change. For example, we are members of the Police Reform Action Working Group, where we try to change to instill reforms in the police force by working with the police to ensure that certain of the reforms we want them to achieve are adopted by them. When we cannot achieve it in a different way, we work with them to achieve change from internally. When we are not able to get the right issues working at the judiciary, we work with the Judicial Training Institute and several committees within the judiciary to ensure that the kind of change we want or that we expect the Kenyans to receive, be it here or elsewhere in Africa, is achieved. So there are two ways we go through our activism. Either to have it, for example, when we feel certain legislations ought to be passed as per the Constitution, we prepare the necessary bills as a draft bill and present it through our working group in Parliament. So it is set out as a private member's bill. And many have gone through. If we find that certain workings in the judiciary do not give the intended result, for example, in the alternative justice system, we work with the judiciary to ensure that all these other players are brought together to ensure that that is achieved. If we find that the bail process in the police stations does not resonate well with the police standing order or the charter, we work with them to ensure that that is amended to ensure it complies with the Constitution. If they refuse, then we go back to court. We worked with the DPP to ensure that the process of prosecution works, especially when we find that the violations that are taken place by the police and they must be prosecuted. We work with the DPP and IDIPOR to ensure that the right people are prosecuted. So there is a way we can bring change without necessity of us going back to there. But when we find that that also cannot work because there are some people we may want to reach who don't want to listen, then we issue communiques. we'll issue press statement at the
Right. Name and shame.
We name and shame. We do it.
Right. We have to end closure by asking you to look back 2 years as chairman. Would you be so bold as to suggest a legacy and also to suggest a challenge for your successor? Because one of the things that we Africans are accused of is that we never set the stage for there to be continuity. We must rule in perpetuity. It's the Mogeni dynasty forever. Are you of like persuasion?
You see, as we speak right now, we have come up with our strategic plan for 2021-2024, which we already adopted. 2021-2024 means that the strategic plan that we have set out is going to be taken over by whoever is going to succeed me come November. So we work in terms of setting out the process that we need to achieve. Both, we've got a main area in terms of access to justice. Access to justice is the area that we started off with the former Chief Justice Maraga, and worked in ensuring that there is a technology working within the judiciary. That we started as a pilot project with the Dutch government, and it has taken off. By the time COVID came, it was on a pilot basis. Now it is universal. And we hope to see that working better in terms of ensuring that everybody is empowered to get access to the judiciary from every angle. Access to justice is one of the pillars that we work on. And right. We're seeing that working. It's an area that we've tried as much as possible to ensure that the judiciary and ICJ have worked towards achieving that. We have been on it all through. Then there is a question of the human rights protection. We're talking about decriminalization of petty offences. So many of the bills that we have proposed to Parliament have been passed to ensure that criminalization of these petty offences in terms of the informal settlements have been achieved. And that is working very well for us. And on the international scene, right now as we speak, we've been the only institution, apart from being the human rights organization, we are the only institution now. We are doing the mechanism cases that, in Rwanda, the ones that are being transferred from Germany, from the Dutch government, and from France to Rwanda to try the genocide cases. We have been given the observer status. We are the ones who are doing the observation for those cases in Rwanda. And there's a system that's going on, and we have given our...
Yeah, I take your point entirely, but I wanted to go back and I wanted you to use the pronoun I. Lots of people write memoirs, and I'm sure your moment will come. When you get to chapter chairmanship of the ICJ, what will you take credit for? As chairman, I know that you're elected by a council.
No. I will not come and say.
Yeah.
I took and did ABCD.
Right.
Because
under my wise leadership,
ICJ.
Under my wise leadership.
Yes, ICJ is governed by a council.
I know that.
Of which I'm a member, and I would not want to come and become that king, the king, and say that I was the one who did ABCD.
Fair enough.
Now, let me give this because most people may not understand. We are a board, but ICJ is managed by a very brilliant executive secretariat, which through our leadership, we achieve so much in terms of the day-to-day organization and workings. So I would not want anybody to think that I sit here and say, oh, I as Kelvin Mogeni has gone and did and done all this, because we work through a set system that has been there the last 62 years.
I take your point entirely. But I will get in one last question. Which is, from my researches, the understanding that the ICJ, with lawyers of a certain age, based in Nairobi, in the capital, is very sort of staid and conservative, and younger lawyers are setting up alternative institutions and NGOs because they feel that the ICJ is not up to the times. 62 years is old, grandpa, you should now go to pasture. Is that something that you'd respond to by way of closure?
Sure,
and
sure.
That you also that you don't invite young lawyers, and that you don't have lawyers that come from anywhere from the far-reaching corners of our nation.
That statement is 100% incorrect.
Correct me.
Yeah, we are 62 years old as an institution, but our membership is not 62 years old. We take our membership from both university students, young lawyers, and very old lawyers, including judges. It's not just limited to the practicing lawyers only. We have membership from the university level up to the Supreme Court, as we're speaking. Our membership, it comprises all those. And I'll give you an example. Of the young members I have in the organization, including my two daughters, lawyers in the institution, they are yet to be admitted, but they are still members in the organization. They are technical savvy. We are old guards, yes, we may not be very conversant in terms of technology, but they are there. Very many of us, and the secretariat, by the way, is led by a very young team. We got interns who come in as soon as they are leaving college, who work there. They come from high school, they come and train, and we take them up as they move up. So it's not an institution made up of very, of course, you can't do away with wisdom of the age, because our membership must always remain and take the wisdom from the older generation. But yes, our institution we got that, the resource materials we have from our long association in terms of working the human rights around Africa and associating with our like-minded institutions around the world. But we ensure that we change with the times. Those who are there, they keep us going. And with the old who still give us wisdom, the young who come and with the new ideas, and we keep them going.
We have to end there. Thank you, Kelvin, and thank you for being part of this conversation on Pass the Mic, Let's Talk, an initiative of the African Center for Ideas program through Jade Communications.
Thank you, John, for having me.
Thank you.